You know that feeling when you just decide completely out of nowhere that it is time to overhaul your entire life?
Oh, absolutely. The sudden burst of 3 a.m. motivation.
Right. Like you set this massive life-altering goal. You're incredibly motivated. You buy the expensive new running shoes. You download like 3 different tracking apps.
You meal prep on a Sunday?
Exactly. You block out your entire schedule. And for about 2 weeks, you are just an absolute machine. You feel untouchable.
Until you don't.
Yeah, until a random Tuesday rolls around.
Yeah.
You hit snooze. It is one day, and then that turns into missing 2 days.
And before you know it, you're right back exactly where you started.
Staring at those really expensive running shoes in the corner of your bedroom, just feeling incredibly frustrated, wondering why you have zero willpower.
It is a universally maddening experience, and the real tragedy is that we almost always blame ourselves for it.
We totally do.
We internalize that failure. We think, we just didn't want it badly enough. Or that we lack some fundamental character trait that successful people seem to just have in spades.
But it's not a character flaw, right?
No, not at all. When you actually strip away the emotion and look at the reality of human behavior, it's much more mechanical. We're basically fighting against our own neurological wiring.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are jumping into James Clear's incredibly influential book, Atomic Habits.
It's a fantastic text.
It really is. We're going to explore why tiny, microscopic 1% changes are essentially the only reliable way to completely overhaul your life.
And we're going to dissect the actual machinery of how your brain physically builds a habit.
Right. But we aren't stopping there. We are also going to uncover a really surprising, almost counterintuitive trap waiting for you right at the finish line.
The hidden downside of building good habits.
Exactly. But to really grasp the gravity of this framework, we need to start with how the author actually arrived at these insights.
Because this wasn't born out of some sterile academic laboratory experiment, It wasn't researchers watching college students press buttons.
No, not at all. The origin story here is intensely visceral. On the final day of his sophomore year of high school, James Clear was hit in the face with a baseball bat.
It's a brutal story.
It's horrific. And we aren't talking about a glancing blow. The bat literally slipped from a classmate's hands during a swing, flew through the air, and smashed directly between his eyes.
The sheer force of the impact crushed his nose into this distorted U-shape.
His brain swelled rapidly. He suffered multiple skull fractures, shattered eye sockets.
And the immediate aftermath was terrifying. When they took him to the nurse's office, they asked basic questions just to check his cognitive function.
Like what year it was, right?
Yeah. They asked what year it was, and he said 1998. It was actually 2002.
Wow.
He couldn't even remember his own mother's name without this agonizing 10-second delay. He had suffered a horrific traumatic brain injury.
Followed by months of seizures and a medically induced coma. When you hear a story like that, it completely reframes the entire concept of a habit. Because when he eventually returned home, he couldn't just write down a massive goal like, I'm going to get back to normal by Friday.
Right. That simply wasn't a biological option for him.
His baseline existence was completely destroyed. To bridge the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be, he had to rely on the most microscopic, mundane daily routines.
Things like going to bed at a specific time.
Keeping his room clean. Studying for 10 minutes.
These weren't just cute productivity hacks for him. They were absolute, literal survival mechanisms.
And Clear's agonizingly slow recovery proved this fundamental truth about human nature that, frankly, most of us completely miss.
We dramatically underestimate the power of small, sustained actions.
Because our culture is utterly obsessed with the illusion of major overnight transformations.
We see the final result, the best-selling book, the gold medal, the massive company, and we falsely assume that massive results require massive, chaotic bursts of action.
But if outcomes are just the visible tip of the iceberg, then everything underneath the water is what actually matters. Clear argues that your outcomes in life are essentially just a lagging measure of your habits.
That's a great way to put it. Think about checking your bank account, your net worth. That's just a lagging measure of your financial habits over the last 5 years.
Your physical fitness is a lagging measure of your eating and training habits.
Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning habits. You literally get what you repeat.
Which brings us to arguably the most important sentence in the entire text, the thesis that everything else just rests upon.
You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems.
I love that quote. It completely flips the script on how society conditions us to operate.
We spend all our time obsessing over the goal, visualizing the finish line, staring at the prize.
But if outcomes are just a lagging measure, then staring at the goal is like looking at the scoreboard instead of actually playing the game.
Exactly. The purpose of setting a goal is simply to define the direction. It's to win that specific game.
Right.
But the purpose of building a system is to continue playing the game indefinitely.
Like a runner. If you only focus on the goal of finishing a marathon, what happens the day after the race is over?
The medal goes on the wall, the motivation completely evaporates, and you stop running.
The game is over. But if your system is built around the daily practice of running, you don't stop just because a race ended. True, sustainable long-term thinking is actually goalless thinking.
So if the system is the engine that drives everything, the question becomes, where do we even find the ignition switch?
Okay, let's unpack this. If I want to change my system today, where's the actual starting line?
The starting line isn't what you want to achieve, it's who you want to become.
Ah, identity.
Yes. This is the concept of identity change, and it serves as the North Star for all habit formation. Most people approach change completely backward.
You see, I want to write a novel which is entirely outcome-based.
Exactly. Instead, the focus has to shift inward. You have to say, I want to become the type of person who writes every single day. That is identity-based.
It's like you have to cast tiny votes for this new identity every single day through your actions.
That's a perfect analogy.
You sit down at the keyboard for 5 minutes, that's a vote for being a writer. You don't have to write a masterpiece. You just have to prove to yourself that you are that type of person.
And those daily actions, those votes, are governed by a very specific, deeply ingrained neurological loop. CLEAR breaks down all human behavior into a 4-step mechanical pattern.
Cue, craving, response, and reward.
Right. It is an endless subconscious feedback loop running in the background of your mind every waking second. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine trying to conserve energy.
So first, it notices a cue.
A small bit of information in your environment that predicts a potential reward. That cue immediately triggers a craving.
And the craving isn't for the thing itself, right? It's the motivation to change your internal state.
Exactly. Then comes the response, the actual physical habit or action you perform. And finally, the reward, which satisfies the craving and reinforces the original cue.
So it knows to repeat the entire cycle next time. But if my brain is just a prediction machine running this 4-step loop on autopilot, relying on sheer willpower sounds like a completely losing battle.
It is a losing battle. Willpower is a finite resource.
So I have to somehow trick my environment or hijack this loop instead of just trying to force myself to be better.
That is precisely the realization you need to have. To systematically build the life you want, you have to actively manipulate that habit loop. CLEAR provides a framework for this, called the 4 Laws of Behavior Change.
Let's walk through how to actually hack this machinery. If the first step is the cue, the rule has to be, make it obvious.
Because the problem is that most of our daily habits are completely invisible to us. We scroll on our phones or bite our nails without any conscious thought.
To make the invisible visible, there's this fascinating strategy mentioned in the text used by the Japanese subway system called pointing and calling.
Oh, I love this example.
Right. The conductors physically point at different signs and literally call out their actions like signals green to forcefully drag unconscious habits back up to a conscious level of awareness.
They are adding friction to an automatic process to prevent fatal errors. Conversely, when you want to build a new positive habit, you need to seamlessly attach it to an obvious cue that already exists.
Habit stacking.
Exactly. You don't just vaguely promise yourself, I'll meditate more. That has no cue. Instead, you say, after I pour my morning cup of coffee, I will immediately meditate for 1 minute.
Because the act of pouring coffee is already a rock-solid habit.
Yeah.
You're just stacking the new behavior right on top of it.
Okay, so the cue is obvious, but just noticing the cue isn't enough to make you actually get off the couch.
There has to be some biological drive pulling you toward it, which brings us to the craving. The rule here is, make it attractive. And this is all about dopamine, right?
It is entirely about dopamine. And the evolutionary biology here is absolutely brilliant. We used to think dopamine was just the pleasure chemical released when you get a reward.
Right, like after eating chocolate.
But neurologists found that the massive dopamine spike doesn't just happen when you experience the reward, it happens when you anticipate it.
Oh, wow.
Think about our ancestors hunting and foraging. If dopamine only released after eating, we would never have the motivation to walk 10 miles to find the food in the first place.
So the anticipation of the reward is what forces us to take action. When I see a donut sitting on the counter, my dopamine spikes before I even take a bite.
And that chemical surge is what physically compels you to walk over and grab it.
To hack that for things we don't want to do, the text suggests temptation bundling. You pair an action you genuinely want to do with one you desperately need to do.
Like telling yourself you are only allowed to listen to your favorite true crime podcast while you are doing the dishes or folding laundry.
You are using the anticipation of the podcast to drag you through the chore. You are artificially manufacturing that dopamine spike.
Once the craving is established, we arrive at the response itself. The rule here is, make it easy. Human behavior naturally, inevitably follows the law of least effort.
We are biologically wired to conserve energy. There is an analogy straight from the text for this that completely changed how I view motivation.
The garden hose.
Yes. Trying to pump yourself up to do a really difficult habit like a grueling 1-hour workout when you haven't exercised in years is like trying to force water through a deeply bent garden hose.
You can do it if you crank the valve and apply a massive amount of pressure.
But it requires exhausting effort and creates tons of tension. Making your habits easy is like just walking over and removing the bend in the hose. You don't need more pressure. You just need to remove the friction.
Redesigning your environment is how you unbend the hose. If you want to run in the morning, the friction is finding your clothes in the dark. So you lay them out the night before.
But even more powerfully, if you are struggling to start a new behavior, you must employ the 2-minute rule.
Standardize before you optimize.
Exactly. Your goal shouldn't be a 3-mile run. Your only goal, the only thing you have to accomplish, is to tie your running shoes. That takes less than 2 minutes. It creates a gateway habit.
Because you cannot optimize a habit that doesn't exist yet. Just show up and cast the vote for your identity.
And that brings us to the final piece of the loop, the reward. The rule is, make it satisfying.
The fundamental cardinal rule of behavior change is that whatever behavior is immediately rewarded is repeated, and whatever is immediately punished is avoided.
Our brains prioritize immediate payoffs over long-term gains. So you need to manufacture some sense of immediate success, even if it's just the visceral satisfaction of putting a giant red X on a physical wall calendar to keep a streak alive.
When you align those pieces, making the cue obvious, the craving attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying you, effectively build a frictionless autopilot for your life.
You transition from conscious, agonizing effort to unconscious, effortless competence.
Exactly.
Right, wait. I need to stop you right there and push back on this because this brings us to chapter 20, and it completely throws a wrench into everything we just talked about.
Oh, yes, the paradox.
We just spent all this time outlining the exact, precise steps to put our brains on autopilot. The entire goal was to save mental energy, remove friction, and build these effortless systems.
Right.
If I finally get to the point where I am eating healthy and exercising without an existential battle every morning, isn't that the definition of total success? Why on earth is Clear suddenly saying that not thinking is a bad thing?
It's a brilliant question, and it highlights the central paradox of the entire book.
Why would I want to disrupt a system that's working perfectly?
Because the upside of habits is exactly what you just described. We can do incredibly complex things without expending conscious thought. It frees up our mental bandwidth.
So what's the downside?
The dark downside of habits is that because we stop thinking, we stop paying attention to our own small errors. You see, when a skill becomes completely automatic, we get incredibly comfortable.
We just stop trying as hard.
We falsely assume we are doing it the best way possible simply because we are doing it the easiest way possible.
Oh, wow. So we just slide into a comfortable rut. We mistake ease for excellence.
Precisely. You stop improving. Consider driving a car. You might consider yourself a good driver because you've been doing it automatically on your commute for 20 years.
Sure, I can drive to work without even remembering the trip.
But you aren't a great driver. You aren't a professional Formula One racer. Why? Because a professional doesn't just drive on a mindless autopilot. They actively analyze every single turn, their braking pressure, their entry angles.
The moment you let a skill become purely automatic, your performance plateaus.
That is the ultimate trap of the automatic mind.
That is genuinely terrifying. If automaticity is a trap that guarantees a plateau, how do the world's absolute best avoid it? How do elite performers break past that point where they are just good enough and actually achieve mastery?
Clear provides a definitive mathematical formula for this transition in Chapter 20. He says habits plus deliberate practice equals mastery.
Habits plus deliberate practice. Explain the mechanism there. How does that actually work in real time?
The mechanics of mastery require you to act almost like a scientist with your own behavior. You narrow your focus to a tiny fundamental element of success.
Okay.
You repeat it until it is fully internalized and automatic. That's the habit part we spent the first half of this discussion building.
Right, 4 laws.
But here's the divergence. Once it becomes automatic, you don't just stay there and enjoy the frictionless ride. You take that newly automated skill and use it as a foundational subconscious building block to attack the next frontier of your development.
The examples he uses in the text make this concept so incredibly clear. Think about a professional basketball player. They have to be able to dribble a basketball completely without thinking. That specific habit must be heavily automated. But why?
Not because dribbling is the end goal.
Exactly. It's because if they have to consciously think about the ball, their brain literally lacks the processing power to read the defense, spot an open teammate, or execute a non-dominant hand layup while the defender is rushing them.
Automating the dribble buys them the mental RAM to spend on the next level of complexity.
It's just like the surgeon example.
Oh, absolutely. A master surgeon must repeat the basic first incision so many thousands of times that they could practically do it blindfolded.
Not because the incision isn't vital.
Right, but because by completely automating that initial step, they free up their cognitive bandwidth to focus entirely on the unpredictable, life-threatening variables that inevitably arise deeper into a complex surgery.
So each habit simply unlocks the door to the next level of performance. It actually never gets easier overall, because the moment a habit becomes easy, you pour your newly freed energy into the next difficult challenge.
You are constantly hunting for the next kink in the hose.
But as I'm reading Chapter 20, the danger isn't just that our skills stagnate if we rely solely on autopilot. Clear points out an even deeper, more existential threat when our habits become too deeply ingrained.
The danger to our identity.
Yes, our very sense of self, that identity we worked so hard to build, becomes dangerously rigid.
This is the peril of identity lock-in. Earlier, we established that your habits shape your identity, and that saying, I am the type of person who does X is a powerful engine for initial change.
Right.
But the tighter we cling to an identity built by our habits, the more fragile we become when the world inevitably shifts. Think of a military veteran.
Okay.
If you spend decades building the intense, specialized habits of a soldier, and you define your entire worth strictly as, I'm a great soldier, what happens the day your military career ends?
You completely lose your compass. The system that kept you alive is suddenly gone. The same thing happens if you define yourself entirely as the brilliant CEO or the unstoppable star athlete.
When the circumstances change, you retire, you get injured. The company is sold, that rigid identity shatters, and you are left with nothing.
So how do we fix that?
Clear suggests we have to actively reframe our identity to be flexible. You translate I'm the CEO into I'm the type of person who builds and creates things.
Or I am a soldier becomes I am the type of person who is disciplined and protects others.
That subtle linguistic shift in definition is crucial. It keeps the core important aspects of your identity intact, but makes it flexible enough to survive a drastically new environment.
To maintain that flexibility and avoid the trap of mindless automation, Clear prescribes a specific recurring antidote: reflection and review.
You cannot just build a system and walk away forever. You have to periodically pull yourself out of the weeds, step back, and look at the larger machinery of your life.
Clear himself does an annual review to look at his objective progress, and an integrity report to ensure his daily automated habits still actually align with his core values and the person he wants to be today.
It is entirely about maintaining brutal self-awareness. You have to actively interrogate the habits you've built.
To drive this point home, there is a stunningly appropriate quote from the Tao Te Ching by the ancient philosopher Lao Tzu included in the text.
It's beautiful.
It really is. It reads, "Men are born soft and supple. Dead, they are stiff and hard. The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail."
That ancient wisdom perfectly encapsulates the dual nature of our habits. They give you the necessary structure to stand up and achieve your goals.
But if you don't continually reflect, review, and adjust, that structure hardens into a cage.
You become stiff, inflexible, and ultimately fragile, completely unable to adapt when the world shifts around you.
So bringing all of this theoretical and neurological discussion back down to earth, what does this actually mean for you listening right now?
If we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, the overarching truth is that tiny 1% changes truly do stack up to massive, remarkable results.
You don't need to burn your life down for an overnight transformation. You need to realize that your systems matter infinitely more than your goals.
And you construct those systems by manipulating your own biology, making the cues for good habits obvious, the cravings attractive, the responses incredibly easy, and the rewards immediately satisfying.
But the crucial, profound takeaway from Chapter 20 is that building the system is only half the battle. You must constantly review your automated routines.
I encourage you to look at your own life right now. What are your lagging measures, your health, your finances, your relationships, actually telling you about your current systems?
And perhaps more importantly, where have you become so comfortably automatic that you've completely stopped paying attention to your own small errors?
Where have you quietly slid from being great back down to just being good enough simply because it was easy?
It requires a profound, sometimes uncomfortable level of honesty to look at the very habits that made you successful in the past and ask yourself, are these still serving the person I need to become tomorrow?
It really does.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. We've talked extensively about reviewing your habits to avoid a plateau in your performance.
Right?
But what if a deeply ingrained, highly successful habit suddenly becomes the exact root cause of your failure? Imagine your environment drastically changes overnight, like James Clear suddenly getting hit with that baseball bat, or an AI revolution completely upending your career field.
If the very foundational system that made you successful suddenly becomes toxic to your new reality,
Exactly. How quickly could you unwire yourself? Because as we've learned today, the real test of human behavior isn't just setting a massive goal. The real test is whether you are soft and supple enough to completely dismantle your own deeply cherished system and build a new one from scratch.